Bam.
This is Irene Kenyon. You can call me Nikki, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
Well, hello, Nikki. How are you?
Hello, how are you?
I'm great. You know what I love? I love that I get to do this. Like, so first off, thanks to Patrick who connected us. I have met so many people in the intel world. Now, I say the word spy, right? This is where I want to start. I say the word spy because if I'm working overseas and if I'm relevant on the battlefield, which means the enemy knows that I'm out there, what do they think I am? Do they think I'm just some dude walking around? No, they think I'm an asset. And so I just treat it like that. I'm like, look, yeah, this is the game we're playing. I'm out here trying to find things out that you guys don't want me to find out. I'm trying to get your people to betray their interests or their country in favor of ours. If you don't think that's a spy, that's great. However, I do.
Well, most people in the intelligence community will like scream about the use of the word spy because spies are generally considered people who actually betray their country, and we don't do that. When I was working on my master's in national security studies, I actually had a professor who used to be in the IC, and he was like, "We are not spies, absolutely not." I'm like, okay. But it's stuff you don't know until you get in the IC, and then all of a sudden you're like, I'm an analyst,
right?
I'm a case officer.
Yeah, that's not a spy at all. I mean, this is the funny thing, right? Like, if you and I were to go hiking in the hills of Iran and we got arrested, we wouldn't be arrested for being an analyst and a case officer, right? They'd be like, here's what you're charged with. And even if you were a baker and you got arrested in Iran, they'd be like, you're here because you're a spy,
Well,
and
yeah,
so
because we're Americans, duh.
Right. So when you're overseas, it's like, this is the reality. And it's just a funny thing. We get so hung up on it, but when you use brass and tacks in the floor and you're knocking things down, we're all in the espionage game.
Sure. And well, the thing is, if you're an analyst or if you're somebody who's actually worked in the IC doing like creating intelligence products, like you are taught from the very beginning, words matter. What kind of terminology you use matters. And you need to be very, very specific about how you use it and what you define and how you define it, because there are some senior policymakers who are like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And if they traded us when we get captured, you know what they would be trading for? Like, oh, well, this is a spy. And you'd be like, no, I'm not. I'm just a collection asset,
That's a lot harder to say. Oh, that's hard to say.
Yeah. It's and look, and I get why, right? Like the legal thing, and you don't want to say this is what we're openly doing. But for me, when I'm openly doing it and I have very little protection, I have very little to offer, I have to be how I do it. I have to be honest and upfront. I have to say, I'm Pete. I'm from the United States. I'm going to ask you questions. I'm trying to keep people alive. Whatever you think of me, it's probably true. If you don't like my questions, don't answer it. But that's when I'm here to help people, and they're like, okay, and then if they ever say, are you a spy? I'm like, absolutely I am. But again, I am not trying to trick anybody. So I'm just open about it. But that's how I approach it.
It really depends on what. I mean, there's open collection, there's clandestine collection. I can't speak today. It's late. Right. I woke up at 5. But there's different types of collection too. So, most people like, for our military folks, if you're a defense attaché, whatever, I mean, your counterparts in country know what you're doing.
Yeah.
They understand what you're doing. They will talk to you, and sometimes they will tell you stuff just to influence what you're thinking. So it is what it is.
It is what it is. One of the things that happens along the way is you realize what you're good at, hopefully, if you stay in long enough, and you also realize when you're good at some point. A lot of people don't get to the point where they really become good, or they haven't found their thing to be good at. There are analysts, there are clandestine people, there are people that have great brains and love the wizardry and the trickery and the technology. Everybody's got to find their spot, and there are so many spots. Did you ever find yours while you were in the service?
I want to say no. And that's merely because you're always learning. You are always learning. So, just when you think, hey, I did this great job and I'm so good at this. And then you realize, hey, I could have done it better. And it's not because, I mean, I do have a certain amount of imposter syndrome, I'll admit it, but it's not because of that. It's not because I'm falsely modest. It's because if you've gotten so good that, or you think you've gotten so good that you have nothing left to learn, you need to leave.
That's true.
Once.
Yeah.
There's always someone who'll do it better. There's always somebody who will teach you something. Yeah. It doesn't matter how long you've stayed in. And that's what I've always tried to teach people that, like when I was doing training in the IC, I've always tried to teach people that, look, you guys are amazing. You guys are incredibly smart. You understand how to do analysis. You understand how to present it. Yeah. I get it. But guess what? You still have stuff to learn.
Yeah. And honestly, if you're at the professional level, and I mean, like you're a multi-degree black belt, if we're going to use martial arts as an example, you should be evolving how doctrine sits. It should be changing because you're so damn good. And I know I've done this. I don't know if I've impacted doctrine, but I know I've been in front of doctrine where I'm like, oh, this is actually going to work this way instead of that way. And it's like a different way to do an arm bar or something. And so, like, one of the things, and I'm going to give you an example, and then we'll just go from there. But I realized that in the modern conflict, and everything's super hyper siloed and contextual, right? So there are two things that I'm going to say. In all of the modern wars, there is no U.S. Army collection asset, tactical collection asset that has more experience than me, because I was in the Army 3 different ways. I've been on 1,000 combat patrols, and I've just collected more than everybody. Everybody else, they graduate up the chain or they get out. I stayed on the ground level, and I just got better and better and better. When you have 70 plus months with a lot of access to the combat ground, you get to be better than someone that has 3 deployments because they were in E5 and they were in E7, and so. And the other thing I realized, and this goes to all of the IC kind of doctrine stuff, but if I'm doing my job, which I do, I am the placement and access. It's my job to create it because it's tactical. We're in and out one day, one time here, one time there. I've got to build a network, and I've got to put myself into that position, because in the modern context of combat, I can't reliably, also may not legally be allowed to work a source in an area and keep that person safe and alive. It's got to be on me, and it's got to be on I don't have the ability to move around independently, right? So I have to be able to create the meetings and the relationships so that I can be in the room where the thing happens. And that's not doctrine.
No, it's not. It's experience, and it's instinct a lot of times. Yeah. And it's respect for culture.
Oh boy.
And the problem is that a lot of our folks will get in country. They'll be there, 8 months to a year tops.
Yeah.
They don't have the opportunity to really understand the culture, to really understand, the person, their interlocutor. They don't. They're like, oh, what a terrible person this is. They don't get them, right? When I deployed to Kosovo, we one of my bigger things was participating in bilateral meetings with Serbian counterparts, discussing issues on the administrative boundary line. Yeah. And the training that we received for our counterparts, they were like, oh, this colonel, he's horrible, and he's misogynistic, and he's a jerk, and he's going to make you feel like crap. Did you just spit something through your nose? That was
I was laughing. It's so true.
Well, yeah, but that's what, they're trying to train you to be adversarial. Right. Well, we go in there, and this guy, first of all, is hilarious, right? Yeah. Second of all, I understand his culture because I was born in the former Soviet Union, right? Yeah. So I get how he jokes. I get the culture. I mean, Serbs and Russians aren't exactly alike, right. But we get each other. The lieutenant colonel, who was my OIC, was like, he's a jerk and you're a terrible person, and he would get really aggravated. And we got to the point where I was sitting across from a Serbian captain, and we would just look at each other with this kind of, because some of the stuff that he would say, you're like, oh my God, that's not how you talk to people. You don't understand. It's just like they don't get the culture. They don't study the military culture. They just think that, whatever they taught us in our, 3-day MRX is dead on. And
Yeah.
it's not. And it's not. And they don't give these people a chance to talk. All they want to do is talk over them. Like, ask the question. Let them start the conversation.
Yeah.
Follow up with questions. Sorry.
No, it's great. I mean, I love that you're saying all these things. I just don't want to get too far because there's so much in what you're talking about. So the first thing is I love to always put distance in between places in context. The difference between St. Petersburg, Russia, and Belgrade, Serbia, is not even 2,000 miles. So that's from where I'm sitting here in Capitola. That doesn't get me to Chicago, right?
Yep.
And so you think about these people, although they are totally different. We'll see Chicago in the Bay Area, although they're totally different places. They're not so different that a person from Chicago wouldn't be able to get what we get. But if you're from Chicago and you go to Belgrade,
yeah, completely different thing. Completely different thing. I mean, these people have been around each other for centuries. They understand each other. Their cultures are in several ways similar, like, religiously, historically, they understand each other. And here's Lieutenant Colonel Snuffy coming in from, whatever, Chicago, not getting anything, not understanding it. And I'm like, sir, you gotta listen. You've got to listen. Well, he's just a jerk. No, he's not. You need to listen. That's why I always said, intelligence officers, the best intelligence officers actually have a good journalism background. Because as a journalist, I was taught, don't ask yes or no questions. Ask open-ended questions. Listen. Make sure they understand that you're listening to them, not just nodding your head like an idiot. And then follow up.
Yeah. That's so good. I've got a mass comm TV radio degree, and I felt like a lot of times I was a journalist. I was also a salesperson, and I was also a networking person. And these were like the basic business skills that we bring when you go out into the field. And you're 100% right. And then when I think about how ill-prepared people are who aren't collectors, like every person's a collector. Oh, please, no, please don't all of you guys collect because you're not any good at it. You have no training in it. Because I'll see the questions they write, and I'm like, tell me what questions you guys want to answer, and I'll help you make better questions. What do I mean you make better questions? And I'm like, I promise. Because not only am I not going to, I'll ask open or closed questions when I want to control the conversation or let it run. And I'm also not going to use interrogatives if I can avoid them, because the interrogatives also close, not all the way, but they close things down. When? Just say, tell me more. Or how do you feel about that? Man, if I can get emotions out of people, whoo, look out.
Or tell me about the time that you, like, do that.
Yeah.
But I mean, I know what they mean when they say every person is a collector. I think people misinterpret that to think that, oh, we must ask questions and, we're spies. What they're really telling you is observe your surroundings.
Right.
Situational awareness. Write down things that you see. It doesn't mean that you're out there, trying to elicit information. No. It just means that, don't even, right? But I know what they mean by that. It's just that people take it like, oh, I'm going to be a badass spy. No, you're not. You're going to sit there. You're going to shut your trap. You're going to look around. You're going to make sure, take notes of the environment, of the surroundings. What do you see? And go from there. Yeah.
There's a good story that illustrates this very thing. So we were doing interdiction patrols, and along the way, I would do my job. It's like, I'm going to blend into your patrol. You're giving me access to the battlefield. And there was a lieutenant who didn't like me for some reason. I don't know. He was sucked in from another unit. So he didn't belong to the unit he was in. They were pushed out to an outlying office. And so they were separate. And so he would kick me off of patrols. And I'm like, man, you don't want to do that. You do not want to kick me off patrols. Here's what's going to happen. Like, I get it tonight. I'm going to let it go. But if it happens again, I have a job to do. And he's like, and then he would kick me off patrol. And then one time he's like, I'll take your interpreter, but not you. And so I'm like, all right, last time, man, last time. And they did it again. I'm like, all right, here's what's going to happen next. I'm going to go see the boss, and he's going to have a problem with this. And and so this guy was real combative towards me, towards the unit he was working with, right? So we would go on these patrols, and I would go with him, and he was interdiction, right? He had a path. We had to follow around on a map, so that the mortar tubes that were launching towards the green zone in Iraq wouldn't be able to they wouldn't know when we'd show up, and which is great. It did interdict, but we would march, like road march, at like 4.5 miles an hour. So we were like walking as fast as you can. And the one good thing was that the Iraqis were calling the police going, hey, I think the Americans are invading, right? So we had the wrong impact. But he went up to this family, and he was barking and he was collecting. And I said to my guy, and I'm like, hey, what's he doing over there? Like, oh, he's trying to find out who's launching the mortars. And I'm like, can you go over there and fix that? And he's like, come with me. So we went over there, and we started talking to this family after the little angry lieutenant left. And I said, hey, I'm sorry for that guy. And then me and my buddy had a dance, my interpreter. And basically he's like, that guy's a hothead. All we're trying to do is just make sure that nothing bad happens to you guys. And the next thing you know, they're like, here's what we saw. Here's who we think the guy is. Here's what family you think. And we don't know if that stuff's true. That's not our job. We just gathered it. But he wasn't going to talk to the asshole, because that guy's such a fucking... So yes, gather information that you see, be observant. If you hear something, write it down. But please don't do my job.
Don't try. Don't try. Like, I know my limitations. I am probably like the biggest introvert you will ever meet, believe it or not. And I know, I mean, I've done interviews as a journalist and stuff like that, but I know my limitations. I'm not going to try and bullshit some guy whom I don't understand into giving me information. I'm going to let the experts do it. I'm going to sit down, listen like a good girl, take notes, and then analyze the information that you bring me.
Yeah. This is a good point, and I want to bring this up because there's very little room for ego in collection, but we all have huge egos. We all think we do it the best. We're, so smart, and we figured a puzzle out. But here's the reality: is we don't know shit. Like, you just don't know. Like, you don't know. One thing I realized one day, and this is years and years in, I've been in a motorcycle accident, and I've been on a lot of combat, but I just don't bend very good, right? And so when the Iraqis sit down on the floor, and I'm like, I'm either going to stand or I got to lean up against it. I just can't sit on the floor. And so the Sheikh's like, hey, I'll get you a chair. And I'm like, oh, great. And he got me a chair. The next place we went to, they had a chair ready. And I'm like, holy shit, these guys talk to each other.
Yep.
Holy shit. It seems obvious. I should know that. I mean, I was really good. And I'm like, oh my God, I can put a message into their system on purpose. Oh, and I can test it. I had no idea that was even possible because my ego never allowed me to see anybody else.
Yeah, I actually, so, when I would talk to like the Serbian armed forces or some civilians or whatever, I would actually kind of make myself a little bit more like GImpy. Like, or I don't know what this means. Oh, I've never heard of this before. I want you to think I am a moron and inform me. Or, oh, I can't go on this joint patrol because everything hurts. And they're like, oh, let me help you. So they take me in their vehicle, and then we have a conversation. But you need to develop these relationships. I'll tell you, we went on a joint patrol with the Serbs, and it was cold. We're talking like grass breaking off because it was icy and cold. I mean, it was bad. And this poor kid, he must have been like a little private, whatever. He didn't have gloves, and he was freezing. And I could tell he was freezing. Like, he's trying not to keep his hands in his pockets, and like his poor little hands are all red. And I looked at him and I said, hey, before we leave, I have an extra pair of gloves. Do you want these? And he looked at me like I just offered him gold.
Yeah.
Literally. He was like, oh my gosh, are you sure? I'm like, of course. Here, take these. I know it's cold. Ran to my vehicle, got another pair of gloves. He was so floored. I swear to you, I could have just offered him a home in Beverly Hills. That's how thrilled he was. He was with a pair of stupid effing gloves.
Yeah.
Right?
It's not just the warmth that the gloves provide. It's the generosity. And it's also the respect for like how you do that. There's like several things happening in that moment. I want to go back to the ego thing because I've definitely encountered females. That's why I'm asking you this during Women's Month. that are like, I will not be subservient. And every collector's got to have their own way of doing it, but they will not be subservient. They will not be undermined. And I'm like, oh God, you're just, all you've got to do in a lot of cases, especially if you're new with this, is just sit there and be invisible.
And
I
be
wish I could be
dumb.
invisible. Yeah, be dumb. Be a little
dumb.
gimpy. And oh my God. And I'm not saying to, like, this is not about you. It's about the fucking war, you know, that you're in, people dying. And if
Yep.
I have to do something I wouldn't normally do, yes, I will do that. I will put myself at risk. So you can certainly put your ego and everything else aside and go, yes, I will be the pretty lady who has no idea what's going on. And I will just work you into a pretzel shape and you'll never know. And girls can do that all day long.
I have a theater background. I can certainly do that. I mean, I got like, our very first meeting with the Serbs, they gave us a glass of rakia. And so, you know, it was a pretty big, it was like a rocks glass. Yeah. And, you know, so we do the, you know, to your health and whatnot. And I just downed the entire thing. And I looked up and they're all looking at me like, oh. And I was like, what? And they're like, you're supposed to sip it. I'm like, oh, crap. So they pour me another glass and then they, you know, and then we all start downing the damn things. By the end of that bilat, they poured me into the vehicle, but they got so comfortable with me. Yeah. They were, oh my God. I mean, you do what you need to do.
You do what you need to do and you get over yourself because our job is so impossible and it's so damn dangerous that there's no room for the other thing. You know, I wish we could teach our young agents, our young collectors how to be how to have a little more confidence so that they could be more selfless. Yep. And I don't think that we do that. You know, like if Pete was in charge, and I'm going to ask you what you think, but graduate AIT, let's put you on a plane. We're going to send you to somewhere not anywhere near here, and you're going to go learn how to live in a foreign environment. If it's 6 months, whatever, you know, and just go and get some language capacity so you learn like how to work with an interpreter or whatever it's going to be. But I think that would be the first thing you do is just like learn how to survive in a place that you're completely foreign in. And you'll come back and then we'll do a class and we'll work on how these things work and shape your machine. But we don't do that. We just kind of push them in and go, you were in the 2 shop, which is, by the way, the intelligence shop. And you were in the 2 shop for the last year and a half. Now you're in combat. And you're like, ah!
And you're like, where's my 2 shop? Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely right. If you don't know the culture, if you don't respect the culture, if you don't understand the culture, you cannot be an effective collector. And I think this is where you and I completely agree. You need to be so confident that you can act like an idiot. Yeah. You need to be so confident in your competence that you can be incompetent. Yeah. Because the more incompetent you are, the more they're going to tell you. Yeah. And that goes, I mean, that goes for a lot of different situations in the war zone, in an intelligence exchange. You know, I can be that, you know, cute little airhead, you know, with the shoulder pads, whatever.
Like, you know, Joan Collins? You can be Joan Collins?
No, the other one. You know what I'm talking about? The Dynasty chick.
Not that with Linda.
Linda Evans. Linda Evans. Yes.
Why do I know that?
I don't know. I don't feel old enough to know this, but I somehow do. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, you absolutely have to be confident enough to act incompetent.
Yeah, it's true. I would tell, I'm coached by interpreters every time. Like one of the first things I said, sometimes I'm going to ask a question that you know that I don't know the answer to. And you're going to, and I'm telling you this because people before you have forgotten, you're going to forget. And you'll be like, Pete, you know this already. And then I'm going to look at you, I'm going to be like, ask that question, please. Because I know the question is so goddamn good. It's so compelling. The person, again, I'm looking for emotion and I'm trying to build trust. Yeah. And so if I'm like, if I say something about Ramadan that's patently ridiculous, I'm doing it on purpose because I know a lot about Ramadan. but I want them to tell me about their Ramadan. I want to learn from them, and I want them to go like, oh, and it's not that I'm being dumb. It's that I'm being willing to be taught something about how they, because like I know here, and again, we'll use the Bay Area all the way to Chicago. Different Christmases exist every inch of that road between the two. They all look kind of similar, but I've been to a lot of different Christmases in my day, and everybody does it a little different. So let me learn by asking this question. Let this person be a great guest. Oh, tell me more. This is great. How do you guys drink this rakia? Oh, you don't just shoot it? Oh, shit. Like, how do you turn it off? Right? That's another thing. How do you make the glass stop filling up? Oh, just drink half and leave it, and we'll never be offended. And that's how you make it stop. And I'm like, oh, thank God. Whew. And then they're like, ha, 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 you know.
Yeah, they think it's great. They were like, oh, she drinks. And then they realized that I was born in the Soviet Union. So they were like, oh, I get it now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you just like when you're done, and you just take a little sip and you're like, okay, we're good. We're good. And you can see the relief on their face too, because they're like, Jesus, I don't want to shoot this shit anymore because it tastes like jet fuel strained through a pair of dirty socks.
Yeah.
I mean,
it does. Oh, it does. God. They say it's plum brandy, and I'm like, there's no fucking plums in this thing.
There's no plums.
It's straight moonshine. Yeah.
It's ass and like maybe some ash.
Right. I want to lick my hand just to make it taste less worse. And my hand tastes terrible.
Yeah. Like seriously, it tastes like ass. It's so revolting.
But when they offer it, best thing in the world, you know, I'm going to be like, let's do it. You know, that's one of my rules. It's one of my basic rules. If someone offers you a drink anywhere in a combat zone, you take it.
Yeah.
You know, in my line of work.
Order number one, be damned.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, because you know, I went out with a bunch of priests, and you know, each family in Serbia has their own rakia recipe. So the priests were like, "Oh, I have pear brandy." I'm like, "This is not pear. This is ass yet again. It's horrible." But you know, you drink it, and you get to know them, and you get to know their family background, and they tell you how their grandpa used to. You know, strain this crap through, you know, his dirty underwear. Like, who knows?
Right.
But then you go back to base, and then you have your, you know, your seniors going, you were drinking. Well, no
yes, I was.
Shit. No shit. I actually had the head of our MP unit. We were talking after I'd gotten back, and he goes, take some gum before somebody actually smells you. I was like, rock and roll, dude.
We went to our headquarters. This is in Bosnia. We went to our headquarters, and we had to go get supplies for like all of our incentives. And by the way, people who think it's not classified. We have incentives. We give them out, and what the incentives are also not classified. We have money. We have booze. We have like Game Boys and shit like that. What was valuable was booze, because people couldn't get Jack Daniels, and they wanted to try it, not because they wanted to get drunk, but they wanted to drink the American drink. And so I go get a box of booze, clink, 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 clink. And I'm walking back to the commander's vehicle. And I tell the commander's driver, you cannot look in this box. What is in here is classified. And he goes, oh, okay, Pete. Okay. And then the box falls over, and a bunch of bottles go flying out while they're driving to the next spot. Luckily, the commander wasn't in the vehicle. He was just going because they had to have 4 vehicles. And he comes back and he's like, I saw what was in that box. And I'm like, it's all right. I'm going to swear you in. But you can't tell anybody because we use this stuff, you know, and we create favor with it. He's like, ooh, okay. And he was a really cool dude and everything else, but it's true. We're allowed to have and drink alcohol. People don't like that, but it is part of the thing because, again, if it's me drinking something and preventing a bombing potentially, or going, I'm sorry, I can't drink. My boss's boss says that, you know, ain't gonna happen. Ain't gonna happen.
Dude, really?
Yeah.
Like we need to establish relations, right? Like we need to establish relations. I was acting as interpreter for the Minister of Defense of Ukraine when he came to Bondsteel. So I was with him for like 3 days, and I was a Terp. I was a completely it was my first time being an interpreter officially ever. So, you know, did a pretty good job, and they gave me a bottle of wine as a thank you. Well, yep, my roommate was Jag. You need to spill that out. Fine. Went to the bathroom, poured the entire thing out, tossed the empty on her bed.
Yeah.
These people, I swear,
I know.
They don't get it.
And usually in general order number one, okay, so just for the audience, if you don't know, general order number one, there's several general order number ones, but this one is like, you will not have sex, have porn, have alcohol, blah, blah, blah. But there's always a caveat unless you're otherwise authorized, basically, right? And you're like, that's me. That's my job. And if you need it, I got the rig. Here's the line. But you don't want to have to go down that road. So it's better to go, I had to pour all your booze out. If I drink it here, it's not a problem. If I drink it there, it's a problem. And then you're like, all right, let's drink. And then you drink off.
They have to pour you into a vehicle.
Yeah.
Hey, you're lucky a bunch of hookers didn't come tumbling out the box.
Seriously. It's very, very lucky. Because I could do a lot of damage. I love when like these companies talk about technology is important and protecting that stuff and having robots help you do that. That's great. But all I need to do is get a hunk of ass, and you're a guy who cannot get his own hunk of ass, and I will curry favor with that person.
Yep.
It's just, and I'll tell you, this is how true this is. If I was going to go work with a special operations team and I got to be with them before we deployed, I would try to get someone laid.
Yeah.
I would use a honeypot on them so they'd be like, oh, Pete's cool. Because I don't need to get me laid. I need to show you guys that I'm good at my job. And then I would tell one of those guys, who do you want me to try to get laid? Get Jackson laid. I'm going to go try to get Jackson laid. And just me trying is, it's not a honeypot because then it happens, but it's me going, I'm going to try to get you laid. And on occasion, pretty often, I can do it.
Yep. Best wingman ever.
Right. And now when you deploy, they're like, that's Pete. Because I wanted to be Pete. I didn't want to be Mr. Turner or Sir or Turner. Pete. If I was Pete, even to the combatants, that was a KPI for me.
I still had, Sergeant or Sergeant Mickey. What?
Yeah.
Okay.
So how do you, what are some of your KPIs? Like when you're in the field environment and you're trying to collect, how do you know when you're doing a good job? Because you write reports, they go up and you never hear about them again. How do you get a sense for this is working, this is valuable to the command?
So for me, because I wasn't an official collector, I was just somebody who was there to collect information because I happened to understand the language.
Right.
But for me, it was seeing these guys put their arm around me and go, she's one of us, which was a real problem when you get back and somebody says, hey, they said she was one of us. But yeah, I mean, when they honestly consider you a friend, when they talk to you about anything and everything, their families. I had one guy give me a CD with some heavy metal on it. Nice. And he was like, Serbian metal here. I'm like, yes. Awesome.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's, when you develop that relationship, when, some captain pulls you aside and says, dude, my boss is a fucking idiot.
Yeah.
You know that, but at the same time, that's also information because you can laugh about it, but then you go back and you say, hey, he thinks his boss is a fucking idiot.
Yeah.
And they, his troops have no respect for this guy. That's a weakness. That's a weakness in this particular officer that we can exploit.
Yeah.
Hey, what do you think of this? What do you think, the Russians did here? I saw on the internet that this happened. And when they're willing to really honestly talk to you about it, and you can glean some piece of information out of it. Like I said, when he says, hey, my boss is a fucking idiot, that's a really important piece of information because that gives you it gives you the intel to go, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I might want to talk to this guy and get some information out of him because he's too stupid to know that I'm trying to elicit information out of him.
Can I just say, there's only a couple times in that last minute and a half, 2 minutes that you were talking, there's only a couple of times when it was clear because we're talking about bilateral operations.
Yes.
I didn't know whose officer you were talking about, us or theirs, because as well as I do, this shit gets crazy. And if I'm doing a great job and I'm inculcating into the environment and doing what I'm supposed to do, becoming a normal part of their environment, I've got to go back home and let them know I'm on your team. Yep. And it's really hard because there'll be some captain that will always get hard on for me, like, oh, who's that guy and everything. Luckily, I learned how to insulate myself from those people, but they're always, and I always said, I'm way more in danger on this camp. If I piss off the wrong colonel because I tell the truth and they don't like it,
Yeah,
it's
my
deadly.
career is over.
Right. And so when you were talking about all these officers who were bad and who were idiots, and I'm like, which one's she talking about? Because, you know, and that's it.
Interesting, Pete. I'll tell you what. So if for example, my counterpart on the Serbian side thought that my OIC was a moron, which they did, and they told me, and they told me particularly why they thought my OIC was a complete fucking moron, I could go back and structure the next conversation for him and for his Terp. So, hey, you know, talk about this or ask this. They don't think you know this. So it also works both ways, right? I mean, I kind of knew he was an idiot. Okay. You know, I've told you stories before about that. He was an idiot, fully admit it. But it gives you the opportunity to structure his conversation, and just like give him the opportunity to shine. Yeah. Because really, that's kind of our job. You know, part of our job is to make sure that our officers aren't viewed as complete fucking morons. And this dude was an imbecile. Get it.
Well, you know, and in their own right, in their own spot, when we find our spot, we're great at whatever it is that we do. But I'm a firm believer that unless you were, like, it's hard to become a foreign service officer, right? It's hard to become any kind of foreign engagement person. It takes a lot of time to begin to start the work. But we kick people out and be like, go engage, go partner. Like, no, again, please don't do that. And I just got to say this. I am a firm believer. If I can make one change in the military and its engagement, I would say you are not allowed to engage, not even a commander, you are not allowed to engage in the civil populace unless you've been through an interpreter course. And that means the interpreter has been trained, you've been trained how to train your interpreter, and you've also worked in a training 3 courses to be professional. You've also worked in a live like setting in a field problem. There's no classroom time. You're just lurking, because what I learned to do was to say, Nikki, you're my interpreter. And if you sniff something out and you want to go get it, you've got permission to do it. Here are the things that we're looking for. And so if you go to me, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to shut up. I'm going to sit back and I'm going to observe and take notes and I'm going to listen. So like if I'm talking to a mullah and all of a sudden his phone starts ringing, I know to shut up because my Nikki is going to be listening to that half of that conversation, and he's clocking. We're not going to talk about this shit. I'm going to do something to occupy my time to keep the environment, because we're doing collection right now. This person's hugely influential. And then I'm like, later on, he's like, okay, here's what happened in that phone call, and you write it all down. But if I don't give you the freedom, because the thing that like they teach us is there's no trust. I'm like, Nikki's an American, for crying out loud. It's not going to be ask her exactly how you need to be able to structure things. I need to give you a chance to figure out how we run this conversation, because I can't be Russian, I can't be Serbian, but I can rely on you to make us both better at that.
Yeah, but a lot of our folks aren't trained to respect their Terps. Right. They're just not. It's the opposite. They're like, you're just my mouthpiece. Like, dude, no, fuck. Yeah. Like, okay, these people have, at the very least, a secret clearance. Right. They are American citizens. They understand the culture, which is something you don't, because you're an imbecile. And they can actually have this conversation and understand how to talk, not just what to say. Yeah. You know? Yeah. Like I went out with a bunch of I got a call over a weekend one time, a bunch of Serbs, and they were like, hey, so there's like an illegal wood cutting incident. I'm like, oh great. They're gonna take away my Saturday so I can go look at wood. Fantastic. Mm-hmm. So I go in there and I had the Terp, and we had the Serbian captain, and they were going back and forth, and I'm just standing there listening. And then the farmer who owned the land says, okay, well, I'm just going to drop this matter if I can take her home. And he points at me. And the captain looks at me. He looks at the farmer and he goes, you do realize she understands every word you say, right? Dude turned tomato red. Couldn't apologize quickly enough. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I was just kidding. And I was like, dude, whatever. And I just laughed at him. And I laughed it off, and it was fine. Yeah. And eventually he just dropped the matter. He was like, yeah, somebody cut my wood. Congratulations, your wood's been cut. I just love saying the word wood. Wood. But yeah, I mean, you have to be able to like talk to these people and relate to them and not just know, oh, you know, wood is this in you know, oak is hrast in Serbian, like whatever. No, that's not the way we work things.
Yeah. The you said a thing earlier too. You're talking about like how the person likely has a security clearance, and if they don't, it's still, you don't work from a position of mistrust. You have to, if you're a collector or an engager, if you can't develop a positive relationship with your interpreter, and sometimes it's not possible, but if you can't reliably and repeatedly do that, again, you don't get to engage people. Yes, it might be slower. Yes, you might have to be a little more careful, but you have to build that bond, because that person is at least half you, and you need them to become, and this is the part that's pro. I need Nikki to be half me, because she gets my mission and I'm guiding. I'm always in control, but I'm letting her do it, right? Yep. She also has to become half my partner. And if she can do that, if you can get them to be like, look over the shoulder and be like, how about we do this? And I'm like, yes, Nikki's killing it right now, you know? And I just sit back in the easy chair and I just take my notes, I scratch out whatever I can understand. But if I can't get you to that point because I'm afraid, or I've been trained wrong, or not trained at all, then I am destabilizing the battlefield.
Yeah, exactly. And I will go even further to say that your Terp is 1/3 you, 1/3 your mouth, 1/3 your partner, and 1/3 your interlocutor.
Yeah.
Because the Terp understands your interlocutor, and they have to. I love that word. They have to. They have to understand. Again, it's about the culture. It's about the language. It's about how they use the language. So that Terp has skills you will not have.
Oh, man. Yeah.
And you need to trust them.
Yeah. My interpreter was a guy who lived in the United States. One of them. There's a lot of them, but one of them was a guy who lived in the States for over 30 years. He hadn't become a citizen yet. It wasn't important. He was a legal alien and so whatever. And he deployed, and he was fantastic. And the units, every time they would lose track of who he was, because he would stay with the unit, right? Or with the location, not the unit. And the new unit would come in and be like, this is the commander's interpreter. And he would know, he's like, I'm going to end up being the commander's interpreter. They'd go to the meetings. And they're like, hey, where's, you know, the guy's name? Where's that guy? And they're like, who's that? Like, oh, that's just going to be your interpreter. And we all know this. We've seen this several times. Like, what are you talking about? And so the partner is so bonded to the other guy. They called him the Kuwaiti, because he was a Kuwaiti family. And they would make jokes about it. And so he'd be talking blah, 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 back and forth. And the commander would look at him and be like, you are already having a conversation. And like, these are smart people, these Americans. And they could not understand why the guy who's not their interpreter is having this fantastic conversation with his partner, and he didn't know anything about it, you know? And it's like, you guys, you have to learn, all of us, the United States military and State Department, you have to learn how to work with interpreters. You have to become professional at this. You have to.
Yeah, you do. And even if you understand what the other side is saying, let the Terp do their job.
Right.
I would never, like, we went a few years ago, we went to Ukraine and we had some meetings and we had an interpreter. And when I would sit there and I would take notes, obviously, you know, if they were speaking Russian or Ukrainian, like, I get it, I understand it, but I let the Terp speak, and I would only take notes when they translated. Because you need to let them engage and create that bond. Hey, we got this guy who understands us. Okay, great. Yeah. Let's just go back and forth. You let them do their job.
I think it's a great exercise to train military people on how to use an interpreter by simply doing it all in English. Like I would say, Nikki, I want you to say everything I say word for word, do not change a bit of it. And then have a conversation and see how fucking awkward that is.
Like,
you know, especially if you were bad at, because I always say, here's the worst way to find out where the bombs are. You start off with, where are the bombs? It never works, but it's one of the questions they want you to ask, and so it's like, no, let's be a little more deliberate about this. And then what I say to every interpreter I use, I'm like, surely there is some way that you know how to get what you want and you don't go directly for it. Unless it's time to go direct, then you do it. But you don't say, where are the bombs? You say, how are things in the area? That's question one of a 100-question chain that you have to get through. And I've got to help you understand that. And you've got to say, I know how to get what you want. Give me 2 hours, a little bit of booze, sit with me, take notes. I'll fill you in as needed. And if we can get to that point, again, I will whoop anybody's ass collection wise.
Yeah, no, I think I've seen people take courses on how to use interpreters. There are certain little strategies that they teach you. It's not enough. They were always telling me, like, you don't ever look at the interpreter. They don't exist. They're the mouth. You just have to look at your, your interlocutor. And I'm like, oh.
Says the guy who never got laid ever.
Or if he did, it wasn't real and it was
he had one of those whores that was in my box. And I did it for him. Okay, all that stuff is great. And I really would love to talk more about that. But I got to move us on because you do have such interesting knowledge about Ukraine and Russia and the fight. And one of the things that we've all been talking about in my world is, one, we are bad at unramping wars. We will just keep going on. And for all of the good things that we're trying to do as a nation, especially with this president right now, who's like, we're going to be more green and everything. There's nothing that any of us in the history of the US can do to make that much carbon problems. Combat is dirty business. It poisons things. It kills people. How do we, if we can, how do we get the Ukraine and Russia to come to some kind of agreement? And then how in the world do we go to the Ukraine? Because, we're going to be desperate to do this and try to reignite their nation in a way that makes sense.
So, first of all, I will say this, and this is coming from someone from the USSR. The Russians really love their dictators. They love their strongmen. Okay.
Yeah, they do.
So, if we try to change hearts and minds there, it ain't going to work. The Russians understand force. And the only way we are going to end this war is to make sure that the Ukrainians kick them in the jimmies so hard that they waddle back to Russia carrying a fucking toilet with them.
Yeah.
Okay. I am not like, the Russians are like, oh, well, we tried to negotiate. Dude, you don't negotiate with someone who is trying to kill you, who is trying to destroy your entire culture, who is kidnapping your children, who is raping toddlers to death.
Yeah.
There is no amount of negotiation that you can do with savages like that. What you can do is kick them in the ass. Make sure that you blow them up into little fucking smithereens when there's nothing left. And I'm a little bit passionate about this.
So you're not saying hug it out? We don't hug it out?
No hugging. No hugging. I will never hug another Russian.
Do you think we have the salt to get and to help the Ukrainians get nasty enough to do that?
I do. I think so.
Okay.
Because the Ukrainians, so this is not the same Ukraine as 2014. This is not the same Ukraine that the Russians invaded in Crimea and they just put down their weapons and went, yeah, take it. Because there was corruption and there was, there were weapons and money going walkies and they weren't making it to the armed forces. And, the generals and all of these different officers were selling them off. Like, this is a different Ukraine. This is a Ukraine that's like, they are trying to destroy our country and we are going to kick their ass. And really all we need is the weapons to do it. There was a lot of kind of conversation back in 2014, 2015, should we send weapons to Ukraine? I was, personally, I was kind of like, hey, they're just going to kind of disappear into a hole of corruption. I was not against, I was not for it. Now I'm all for it because I'm incredibly impressed with Zelensky and what he has done to combat corruption. Is Ukraine corrupt? Sure. Is the United States corrupt? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. There is not a country in the world that doesn't have corruption.
Yeah.
But Zelensky has been really focused on trying to fight this corruption. And he has made a lot of progress. Whereas, in 2014, 2015, dude, it was like, why are we sending money into a black hole? No, that's not the way this works. But, even the Russians were trying to undermine the Ukrainian anti-corruption efforts because they knew that if Ukraine became less corrupt and more kind of entwined with the Europeans and more, more like part of Europe as opposed to part of the Russian sphere of influence, that they could never do what they wanted to do. And they miscalculated badly. They went in there thinking this was the Ukraine from, 2014, 2015, and it ain't. So, yeah, I mean, it costs a lot of money to arm them. The Europeans now just put a plan forward to give any country, I forget how many billions of euros to actually produce ammunition to send to Ukraine, drones and tanks, the Leopards, all of that. They need this to fight off the Russians. And it's going to be less expensive for us than sending NATO troops in a couple of years because the fucking Russians are attacking Poland or attacking another NATO partner.
Oh boy. And
the NATO partner says, hey, Article 4 consultations right now. Russians attacked us. Let's do it. Article 5, move.
Can you imagine if the Russians wouldn't be dumb enough to fight the Poles, because the Poles have been pulling at that chain. This is not a good analogy, but just I think you'll get where I'm going. They are the Jews of Europe. Like they're like, anybody who wants to fucking come at us, especially you Russians, we're gonna fucking kill you.
Yeah. And
they are desperate to do it. These guys, I picture them like just like in the back of a Bradley, just like repping with weights, like any moment I get to kill a Russian, like it. Yep. I can't imagine. So the thing I guess I want to ask is, totally right about the Russians loving a dominant leader, right? They love that.
Yeah.
And all you got to read is read your Russian literature and you'll understand that this has always been a thing. How is Putin still alive? What's keeping him alive? Because it doesn't take 500 people to walk to that door, knock it down and be like, you're going to be dead. I mean, how is he still alive?
Everybody keeps asking that. I think the problem is, and obviously I'm not in the IC anymore, so I don't have access to, the pertinent intelligence. But my guess is that, first of all, any oppositionist, anybody powerful enough to challenge him is currently either dead or in prison.
Yeah, probably both.
Probably both. So there's that.
Yeah.
And whoever's left is complete and utter shit, and they support what he's doing. I mean, when you listen to Lavrov talk about the Ukrainians in the West attacked us, and everybody laughing at him during this conference in New Delhi a couple of days ago, where he just went, we were the ones attacked, and everybody literally burst into laughter at him, and he just continued this line, this messaging. You realize that they are so wedded to this narrative. All of them are so wedded to this narrative. They don't care if people are laughing at them. They don't care if the West is sanctioning them. Their economy is swirling the drain, right? They have to use their national sovereign wealth fund to fund their economy. They don't have components. They don't have microchips. They can't produce new vehicles. There was an interview with some old Russian lady who was like, oh, we used to do this all the time. We ride our bikes now. I'm like, dude, wow. There was a report that was talking about the fact that Russians won't buy new vehicles anymore because they don't have the safety features. They don't have the automatic seatbelts and the GPS. So they'd rather buy older model foreign cars that are for sale, used cars, than buy like your Moskvich and your Lada and whatever the hell else they're selling over there that looks really good, but doesn't have a seatbelt, so you might die. No ABS, no, like, all of these different things. Like, so it, like, sanctions, as far as sanctions go, and I work in sanctions now, they're a long game, right? So, people are like, well, sanctions aren't working. I get asked this in the press all the time. I've done interviews with, different media outlets, and they're like, well, sanctions don't appear to be working. I'm like, you don't understand the goal and purpose of what we're doing with these financial restrictions. It's not just about freezing assets, which we have done, and it's pretty awesome because all the Russian oligarchs are now squealing in European courts trying to get sanctions removed. Frankly, if sanctions weren't impacting them, they wouldn't spend God knows how much money on high-end lawyers to get sanctions removed, right? So, so there's that. I mean, they are working because our goal is to pressure Russia. And that's exactly what we're doing. How long we can keep pressuring them, that's another story, right? But we continue to ratchet up pressure until they have to rape their washing machines to get freaking components for their tanks. And they have to steal toilets from Ukraine. I mean, everybody, like, did you know that the last sanctions package from the EU actually banned the sale of European toilets to Russia?
Wow.
As a joke reference to the fact that they don't have toilets. I mean, they seriously, they're fucked. So how long can they keep their economy afloat by using their sovereign wealth fund? Who knows? But we've reduced their, oil revenues by an incredible amount. And it wasn't about like us stopping them from selling oil. That's not what we wanted to do. We wanted to reduce the revenues because their budget, their federal budget, is highly dependent on energy revenues. And it's calculated at 70% per barrel, or $70 per barrel.
Right.
Well, Ural's crude is selling at what, 32? Guess what? That's going to cut into their federal budget. That's going to cut into their revenues. So that's the point of the pressure. So, we got to wait it out. And they're hoping that the West will kind of, get tired of Ukraine and get tired of helping Ukraine and whatever. And they want to kind of wait it out and then they'll attack. It ain't going to happen.
I don't know. If they do wait, we do get sick of war, and we're like, whatever. And then we have an election cycle, and all of a sudden it's like, it's not going to give you $500 million today. It's not going to happen. And when we do have all these things, like all these legitimate things where we have our own problems, we were going to work on infrastructure. But then again, money seems to have changed. And maybe you'll help me understand this. I've been fascinated by the thought about money moves constantly at the speed of light. Like there's been this little post talking about how you should always use cash. And I'm like, cash is inefficient. Money is it's whipping. Like all you can hope to do is channel it to go around you that for a second to gather some of it. It doesn't stop. It's completely digital, and it blows me away like how money is moving now and how fast and how quickly it's like there's a Wells Fargo has an ad where they will prepay your direct deposit to you because they know how much you're going to get. That's how fast money moves. It moves in the future, for crying out loud.
It does. It does, absolutely. And I mean, money has changed, but also I think our understanding of foreign policy has changed. And I have never seen the West so united in their support of a country because they understand that it's either we support them now or we fight the Russians in a couple of years. They fully understand this. I've never seen this amount of cooperation in terms of intelligence sharing and working together. All these different task forces that we've created with our allies. I've never seen anything like this. I don't think it, you know what? Maybe in a couple of years we will get sick of it. But we're not fighting this war. The Ukrainians are. All we're doing is just tossing some weapons at them. And right now, frankly, it's 5% of our defense budget, which, come on, dude. Come
And we're
Like,
getting rid
let's
of a lot of we're getting rid of old shit, and we're also
right.
testing new shit, right? So there
Yeah,
is, yeah.
exactly.
It
So,
does seem pretty ridiculous though to have a proxy war, and it's look, part of me, the dove in me is like, is this really worth it? Should we just let the Russians figure it out, or should we apply pressure on both parties? Like, hey, we've been doing this for a year now. Get your asses to the table, or it's going to get worse for the both of you. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if you could even do that, but at some point we have to figure out how to use our considerable, like we're turning off the dial here, we're turning up the dial for Ukraine. At some point we have to be able to go in and say, all right, are we ready to stop?
well, apparently not yet. And the Ukrainians have given their terms. You know, the Ukrainians were like, hey, withdraw your troops from our territory, give us our territory back, and pay us for the shit that you've destroyed and the people that you have murdered, and return our kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I don't think this is unreasonable. They weren't the ones who are the aggressors.
That's true. That's
So,
true.
you know, I can see. And meanwhile, the Russians are like, well, all our terms are we keep all the land that we stole, and you're not allowed to join NATO. Like, fuck you, man. Who
Yeah.
are you to dictate to another country how they're going to conduct their national security policy? Are you for real?
What if we did a pay-per-view champion fight between Zelensky and Putin, and they
I
just
think
got out there?
Zelensky would win.
I think there's a good chance. Putin's pretty old, and if he's not already still sick, right? So you get out there and like, all right, fellas, we're going to settle this right now.
And they're
Yeah.
both short, so
Yeah.
I mean, it
Yeah.
would kind of work. But like, you know, did you hear the report? I guess it was a few months ago that Putin fell down the stairs and shot himself.
Oh my God.
It was on a Telegram channel. It was supposedly from one of his security officers. He slipped on the stairs. He fell down. He wasn't wearing his diaper.
Is this Putin or Biden or both?
No, it was.
I had to do it.
I know you had to. But yeah, I mean, he wasn't wearing his diaper, and he apparently fell down and like beat himself.
Yeah, it cannot be good for your long-term health to have to run a bad war. You know, when you're a guy like Putin, it just cannot be.
No.
He's already. I mean, the rumors and everything else. I want to get into one more thing before I let you go. And I've had you for an hour. Can we talk for another 5 minutes or so?
Of course.
You wrote this fantastic thing about Amnesty International the other day on your Substack, and like, I don't want to cause any trouble, but you bring up really good points where like things that we all united on, like, hey, Amnesty International is going to work on Nelson Mandela as a problem, right? And we're like, yeah, nobody likes apartheid. How do we apply pressure? But then these things that were one thing have now become politicized in so many ways, left and right, both sides, until that, from what you're writing about with Amnesty International, you're like, wait a second, what are we doing here? Like, do I want to be part of this organization? I mean, what are your thoughts on that? And you even go so far as say, let's get into their books. If you're going to be an NGO, you know, that means there's some oversight on you. Let's start digging around and see how this is going, because from what you're saying in your article, I don't like it.
Well, so here's the thing, right? My view was that with that report on Ukraine, which was abhorrent, badly written, badly reasoned. I mean, you name it. I mean, you saw, I took the entire damn thing apart because, hey, guess what? You don't blame the victim, you know, the rape victim, for having her skirt too short, right? But they were like, oh, well, the Ukrainians are doing this and the Ukrainians are doing that and this and that. And I'm like, they were trying to remain in Russia. That's what they were trying to do. So the question is, why? Who's paying them? Because the report that they put out was beyond abhorrent. It was so badly analyzed. You know, it's amazing to me. I'm looking through it now because I'd forgotten about this thing. But you know, we've documented a pattern of Ukrainian forces putting civilians at risk. Really, a pattern? So what? How do we define a pattern? It's a loaded word. It lacks any kind of context. It's like, you know, when we used to talk about a hub, right? This is an illicit finance hub. Well, what is a hub? What does that mean? You know, give me the context. like nothing. It's, they're constantly doing this. They're putting these reports out, oh, Israelis bad and blah, blah, blah. And they don't give the context of, oh, well, maybe they're being attacked.
Right.
Same thing with the Ukrainians. Well, they're in schools. Well, guess what? There's nobody else in the school. Yes, they housed the soldiers in the school because guess what? The kids couldn't go to school because the Russians were attacking them. Like,
right.
Come on.
Yeah.
So, whenever I see reports like that, I always have to wonder who's paying you. Why are you putting this stuff that's obviously biased, that's obviously badly reasoned? Why are you putting it out? Who's paying you to do that? And what is your purpose? It's the same thing I tell all my analysts. Look at the source. Who owns the source? Yeah. What side of the political spectrum is the source on? How have they reported before in the past? Have they been reliable, or are they just spinning garbage? You always have to look at the source. So when I took apart this amnesty report, my first thought was somebody is paying them. Somebody's got. Why else would you put this out knowing that, number one, it's going to get taken apart into a million pieces by everybody with half a fucking brain cell? Yeah. Why would you pull that out? You know it's going to get criticized, and you can't defend it. It's completely indefensible. So my question is, who's paying you?
Yeah, it's interesting. We live in an era that like right now, the current event right now today, this is for someone who watches this down the road, is Tucker Carlson was given the tapes from the January 6th. We'll just call it the riot. That's kind of right in the middle, right? Bad things happen on January 6th. Yes. And we cannot agree with what's on the videotape, partly because of the source that's reporting it. And I'm not putting my weight behind any of these things. But today I'm in Capitola, and there are two people that go ride by on $25,000 to $5,000 mountain or road bikes, and they've got little masks on their face. These are cloth masks, and I'm like, what on earth are we doing? Like all these different realities. Like, not only are masks now being undermined in terms of their science, but these people wearing them and they're riding bikes, and they're cloth masks. Oh my God, what's going on? So we've got so many problems with like what actually is and isn't anything. Doesn't even matter if Amnesty International puts something out that's bullshit. I don't know, 40% of people who give a fuck about Amnesty International, if not 80%, because they're probably leaning one way on the spectrum, they're going to believe it no matter what.
It's interesting because the reactions that I've seen to this report,
a
lot of people, and I follow my Twitter feed pretty closely, so I'll follow all of these different organizations.
Yeah.
And the vast majority of the reactions I've seen is, I am pulling my support from Amnesty International. This is bullshit.
Yeah. Okay.
I haven't seen a whole lot of people defending that shit.
Yeah.
With that video with like Tucker Carlson, I mean, there's again context.
Oh my gosh.
Different things going on that day in different areas.
Yes.
So yes, there were peaceful people just walking through the Capitol building.
Yeah.
But then there were also people who were attacking cops and who were beating them with flagpoles and fire extinguishers and what else.
And don't talk about editing when you edit the video yourself. Like, you've edited the video too. You've taken 40,000 hours. You've reduced it to something that tells your story, right? Yeah, for sure.
Exactly. So there's got to be context, and you got to look at all sides of everything in order to get the full picture. That's what analysis is.
I don't want to keep it any longer, but I do want to give you a chance to ask me any questions if you want it all.
Oh, good Lord. Now you're going to make me think.
Oh, you've been winging it the whole time?
I totally have. Have. But no, I mean, it's interesting to me how intelligence professionals function in different ways and in different situations. I'm curious how you functioned in different areas, right? Because you weren't just in Iraq, you weren't just in one place doing one thing. So how do you adjust? How do you mentally flip a switch?
The switch for me is pretty simple. We are the problem until we stop becoming the problem. And so I really focus my energy on reducing how much we suck. And that includes me, whatever it is. And so everybody will say, Iraq is so different than Afghanistan. You know what? We're the major force in the area. And if we are shitty at what we're doing, we are the problem. And until we're not the problem, that was my focus. So yes, I'm in town. Yes, I'm trying to understand. Yes, I'm trying to look at the strategic and tactical things at the same time. No, I'm not focused on threat, because if I don't focus on threat, it's amazing. Threat will just come to me. I'd be like, oh, okay, here's the threat. And then I push that off to the person who needs to focus on that. But it's less about them and it's almost all about us. I've got to interact with both sides. I look at it like a math equation. I'm terrible at math, but if I can balance that equation, if I can bring it more into balance, then I've got a chance at being relevant. And then if I can get our side to understand that there's a litany, a whole host of things that have happened before us that we have complete organizational amnesia about, then they can start to say, oh, wow, not only slow down, but do less, be a little more deliberate, and understand that failure is common and that wins are often invisible because we're going so fucking fast. We can't see when something good has happened and then replicate that good thing unreliably for a while. And then and you never get to get past that step because everybody leaves and you're like, all right, well, let's start again. And by the way, 2 years ago when you guys were here and you tried this thing before. So that's where my focus is less about, I don't care how different the Afghans are. I can manage that part. I don't care how different the Egyptians are. I can manage that. I can be a good guest. That's one of my skills. But what I can't reliably do is get us to suck less. And that's what I'm desperate to try to solve when I was doing that work.
Yeah. Oh, so here's another question for you. And I promise this is my last one, because I find this interesting because I've taught classes on credible sources. So, I mean, we all kind of have our gut when it comes to like human sources, right? Like, yeah, I know this guy's telling me the truth. I have a relationship with him, whatever. Talk to me about written sources. What do you consider a credible written source, and how do you corroborate the information that you find?
That's too slow for me. I can't mess with that stuff. And I also can't mess with the reliability of sources. I am too mobile for that. I'm too tactical. So I'm going to go out and this is it's not a black and white thing. I'm just trying to give you some context. Sure. I'm going to try to build a network so that I can go to anywhere I want in that region and I'm talking to someone who's influential. And if I'm doing that, I'm learning up, I'm picking up, scooping up all this information that the commander can't get access to. My job is to meet the people that no one else can meet. When they throw a party and they invite like all the sheikhs, tell your sheikh friends, the sheikhs that don't show up that have influence, I want to know those guys and I want to bring them to our chow hall, treat them like a VIP like they are, and say, have anything you want. Have you ever had cheesecake? What do you want to take home to your kids? And I want to feed that person private conversations so that when I'm talking, and believe me, the boss knows that I'm there. If they wander by, they're like, how the fuck did you get to know? I didn't even know that guy existed. That's what I try to do. And then the reliability of that source, I really don't care about that because I just don't have time for that. That's somebody else's job who's in the two shop and they're like, hey, Pete, did you realize that guy's tied to the Taliban? And I'm like, hey, motherfucker, no shit. Mullah Omar lives in this fucking district. So, yes, he is. And you know what? I'm supposed to be able to talk to those guys. And if he is the nastiest, dirtiest, warlordingest motherfucker I can find, and I can bring him to my chow hall without searching him at all, I just kicked everybody's ass in the battlefield that day. And I know it sounds terrifying to bring the most warlordingest guy into the chow hall unsearched.
Also smelly.
Yeah, it's also super, like that's the top. That's the best you can do because now that person's there and they can let their guard down because they're totally safe on the camp with me.
Yeah.
And I've extended trust to him to say, hey, I'm not going to search you. You're going to come on like a VIP like you are, and we're going to walk you in and I'm going to feed you and you're going to have a great time. And they're like, fuck, I'll do that. And so that is more what I worry about with the reliability is, can I build trust so that I can extend that to someone and bring them into a place where they feel safe and they can truly open up to me and talk. And if I do that, I'll let the analysts worry about what's dangerous and everything else.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like my analyst heart is all in like trying to analyze the sources and do that.
Hmm.
But at the same time, like I've spoken to some of my sources who are human sources on the ground, and I'll be like, hey, I read this. This is a reliable source that,
Hmm.
like do what you will with this information.
Right.
Take a look at it. Does it mesh with what I've given you?
Can I say something else about this whole thing? We tend to build dossiers that go in one direction. We
Yep.
don't like to allow a person, like these are people, like we'll talk about Afghans. These are people who are turncoats. They will take the deal that best suits them the instant they think it changes. And so when you see these people and you're like, they're tied to the Taliban, like, yes, of course.
Yeah.
The Taliban were born right here, you know? So, yeah, I get it. They're dangerous, but all you write about is the bad things. Here's also what this guy does, right? And so I look at the ground truth, who that person is right now, and will they change their mind? Great, then they will. But I can't rely on an analyst's breakdown if they've never met the person. If I've met the person, and this isn't gut, I have a system for establishing trust. And first is how do I build rapport? And that's testable. How do I build trust? And that's testable. And if I've got these things, but I don't care what anybody else says about this person, they might be a new person. They might be shining me on. Look, you can meet someone who's murdered somebody. Maybe they murdered their entire family. They are not 100% evil. And if I can find that part that I can work within, then it doesn't matter as long as I can accomplish my goal through their path.
Yeah. You know what? That is a skill in and of itself, because if I met a Russian who raped that toddler to death, there is no way I can build rapport with that guy. I would be tearing his intestines out through his fucking nose and then shoving them up his ass.
Yeah. You know what? Everybody has that line. I have not found that for me. And obviously I don't condone that behavior, but I have talked to people who murdered for Saddam, and one guy laughed about how he murdered people, and he had them lined up and he's like, and the kids were the best because they would fall funny. And you're like, yep, I'm going to keep talking to this guy. And that shit, you take it to your heart and it hurts you. And it adds to your PTSD profile and all that stuff. But again, it's not my job to assess anything other than how do I turn this person into something that we can work on something together and get to a better spot than where we are,
Yeah, it's not up to you to judge whether he's evil. And I totally get that. I mean, there's a point for me that I have my lines.
Yeah, of course.
There are things that, and again, I'm from the former USSR. I was born in Ukraine, right?
Yeah.
So my line is like right in there.
Yeah. So. And look, I have a line, like if you get within this circle of me, I am now alert to you. And like I could talk to a person face to face, but there are certain things where I'm like, if this line is crossed, I become Pete the murderer instead of Pete the happy-go-lucky guy, right?
Yep.
And it's a black and white line. Like, oh, you crossed this, bam. And believe me, I can be as lethal as anybody. I'm a super fun guy, but don't stand in front of me if I've got a gun and I'm trying to kill you, because I'll hit you. I'll hit you right in the fucking face. So, but luckily, that line is not something I have to worry about because of the way I structure my things,
Yeah, and that's perfect. Like I know my lines. And there are people out there who know me. I'm not just going to shoot you. I'm going to make you hurt for days.
Yeah. Good.
And you will
it's horrible what they're doing. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yep.
And they would deserve it. But when you go back 5 years from now and you and I are working on a team and we meet that guy, we have to figure out how to work with that guy that we got. And if he's one of those people, we're still stuck with that reality, and maybe you don't go to that meet anymore, it's just,
or you don't tell me about it. Come on,
this guy's the best
guy.
This guy's got the best Rocky. We're going to have a great time. Yeah. Oh, well, listen, this has been awesome. I've had the best time talking to you. I hope we can do this again.
Yeah. I'm more than happy to do this. This was fun. I'm also hungry because
yeah. And I got to go meet a guy for beers.
It's after 7:00 my time. I'm hungry.
That's right. Yeah, and it's happy hour here, so I'm going to go. All right, stand by. I'm going to wrap this up. I'll be right back to you. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Try to subscribe. Buy some shirts. Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly.